city planning is, in a sense, as old as cities themselves. From the time the first cities were developed, somebody made decisions about what was going to be placed in what order, and who was going to have easy access and who was going to have more difficult access. Starting in the 19th century and going into the 20th century, as the ideas of modernism began to take root and began to take hold, the notion became that the state, as a rational actor, would be able to plan city space in the interests of everyone. And so we have some great examples of modernist cities that were built in the middle decades of the 20th century. Canberra in Australia, Brasilia, Chandigarh in India. All of these cities were planned by architects and planners with a large vision about how a city should look. And cities were also retrofitted to that vision. The story of planning in New York in the middle decades was a story of a man named Robert Moses, and who was considered the master builder of New York. And Robert Moses took it upon himself to retrofit New York City to the age of the automobile. And he finally came to uneven ending by a woman, a mother and a housewife in Greenwich Village. Her name was Jane Jacobs, and Mrs. Jacobs looked at the street she lived on and said, you know what a city is really about? It's about all the activity on the streets. It's not about highways, it's not about circulation in those senses. And out of that clash, and that clash took place in cities all around the world in different forms. This happens to just be the New York story about that clash. But out of that clash, a lot of the modernist ideas that somehow the state knew best began to crumble. And it wasn't just the extremists of the totalitarian states like the Soviet Union. It increasingly became the case that urban planning and city planning became much more collaborative. The notions of community input are more or less respected. They're certainly always honored formally. Citizen attitudes and ideas are listened to, but increasingly we're starting to develop a new generation of urban planners. The people that I teach, the students at Columbia, the students at at planning schools around the world, increasingly understand that they have to go out and look and see and understand what's going on. And then the question is, how do you organically begin to build? How do you begin to organically change things? The notion of bulldozing entire neighborhoods and somehow starting from scratch is increasingly falling into disfavor. In the developing world, one of the challenges we have, and I do planning in cities in Africa too, one of the challenges is saying we need to design these cities for the people who live here, not the people you fantasize will be here someday. And that means understanding how livelihoods are made. And the important point to always remember, cities are about access. Cities are about meetings. And when you walk through a slum in Accra or a slum in Nairobi, and you look into these very dense settlements, you'll see all kinds of economic activity going on. I don't know where the next great corporation is going to arise from, but I think it's going to come from all the entrepreneurship and ingenuity of all the people in these places, and that our job as city planners is to make their lives easier. They shouldn't have to spend 3 hours a day trying to get clean drinking water. We as city planners have to be trained to focus on the basics: good access to water, public services, transportation, education, making sure these things are easily physically accessible and socially accessible. It's not enough to say you live a few hundred feet from a water pipe, you should have clean drinking water. It becomes important to be able to make sure that you also have access to that. Those are the challenges of planning in the 21st century. It's not going to be the assumption that the state has all the answers. It's going to be the assumption of how do we put together institutions of governance that involve the business sector, that involve community groups, and that involve government in a much more interactive and respectful way. And that's the dynamic by which we hope cities change in the years ahead.